Hi everyone. Greetings to everyone taking part in this workshop, wherever you are. I hope that you and those close to you are keeping as safe and well as you can be. Unless you're in New Zealand, of course, in which case all I can say is I'm deeply jealous of you. I'm very grateful to Cohen and the Global Young Academy for the invitation to speak to you. My name is Simon Chaplin. I'm the Director of Culture and Society at the Wellcome Trust. Wellcome's an independent foundation with a mission to improve health for everyone by helping great ideas to thrive. We're based in London in the UK, and the majority of the 14,000 or so researchers that we support are also based in or linked to UK universities. But our approach is becoming steadily more global as we shift from being simply a research funder to being an organisation which seeks to address significant health challenges. We're known by many as a biomedical research funder, and it's true that science is core to our mission, but we also fund research in humanities and social sciences related to health, as well as work in arts, culture, community and public engagement. Wellcome's had a long-standing commitment to open access to research and to responsible data sharing, both which I'm going to talk a bit about today. But much more recently, we've also taken a broader interest in open science and in research culture, recognising that many of the challenges to making science more open are cultural or structural rather than simply technical. So in keeping with the theme of the workshop and the work of the Academy, I'm going to frame our work in open science in this context. Let me begin by saying a bit more about what open science means to Wellcome and how we're promoting action in a global context, before moving on to talk about the wider obstacles and how they might be overcome. Now, there are lots of definitions of open science. The one that we've worked with at Wellcome defines it as the practice of science in such a way that others can collaborate and contribute, where research data, lab notes, articles, code, materials and other research processes are freely available under terms that enable reuse, redistribution and reproduction of the research and its underlying data and methods. This definition includes what we've traditionally regarded as open access, that is, the unrestricted ability to find, read and use peer-reviewed research articles. But open science builds on open access by recognising that openness is not an end in itself, but is a step which allows for a wider and hence greater use of research, that this facilitates scrutiny and hence improves the quality and reliability of research, and that it depends on the material outputs of science not simply being findable and accessible, but also interoperable, that is, presented in formats that allow them to be collated and compared, and reusable, that is, presented under licenses that don't preclude the kind of activities that enable value to be derived from access and interoperability. Data and text mining are two classic examples of such activities. For this reason, much of what Wellcome has done on open science takes open access and these FAIR principles, F-A-I-R, findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable, as the foundation stones for our work. Now, supporting open access is not straightforward. As many of you will know, there are many different flavours of open access, many different ways of achieving what on the surface appears to be a simple single goal. One of the key elements that's helped drive the open access movement has been the ability to get research funders working together to develop common tools and common principles, which mean that researchers are, at least to some extent, not expected to change their approach with every publication. In the UK, Wellcome began this work by working with other science and health research funders to create a shared framework for supporting publication, both in fully open access journals and also so-called hybrid journals, with the costs of publication being met by the funder. We also coordinated the creation of platforms such as UK PubMed Central, so that open access research articles could be available in a single repository. What was UK PubMed Central is now Europe PMC, supported by a much wider coalition of mostly European research funders, but still growing. And Wellcome is now part of a global consortium, Coalition S, which is creating a shared approach to open access by funders around the world. We also support initiatives such as the Global Biodata Coalition, which goes beyond open access to research articles to look at how core data resources are sustained and not subjected to the vagaries of episodic funding. These kinds of coalitions are important, and they're going to be critical to the success of open science. But the downside of coalitions is that if not managed carefully, they can become both unwieldy and exclusive. And let me talk about each of those points in turn. Coalitions become unwieldy because as you add more partners, each may want to slightly flex or adapt the approach. If we're not careful, we end up with something that is not a set of common principles, but a mess of conflicting ideas. Keeping focus on what is essential and then allowing variation around a common core is critical to success. For Coalition S, this means funders supporting a very clear common goal: zero embargo access to research under permissive licenses, and not supporting the publication of open access research in hybrid journals. But within this common goal, having a whole range of different ways in which publishers and researchers can comply. So there is no single route to compliance with Plan S. Instead, we offer a whole range of routes, and some funders, some researchers may choose to use one or other of them. Now, the second problem that we have with coalitions is that even when they have a clear set of goals, they risk becoming exclusive. And this is particularly true of funder-led coalitions, which need to make sure they take account of the large number of researchers whose work is not directly supported by a grant. We often think about our researchers as a funder. What about everybody else? This is true in a country such as the UK, which has a very strong research funding economy, but even more important in a global context, when access to research grants may vary hugely between countries, across disciplines, and at different career stages. So we need to make sure that other stakeholders, and especially researchers, are part of the conversation. So, for example, with Coalition S, we're working with the Global Young Academy and other early career researcher groups to help us define indicators which will seek to measure the impact of Plan S through the Plan S Monitor Task Force. Here we're addressing the very specific concerns that some early career researchers have, that initiatives such as Plan S will mean they can't collaborate with other non-Plan S researchers, or that their ability to get future grants will be impacted by the perception that they won't be able to publish in, for example, prestigious journals such as Nature. Now, whether these fears are well-founded will become clearer as Plan S is implemented. Already we're seeing a number of major publishers, including Springer Nature, indicate they're going to develop solutions which are compliant. But that engagement with researchers points to a much more fundamental challenge, which is what I'm going to focus on in the final part of this presentation. That is, to really achieve lasting change in open access, open science, and open research in the widest sense, what we need to create is not just a set of policies or technical platforms, but a fundamental change to research culture. The Global Young Academy has been one of the agents of change here, and I welcome the news, for example, that the Academy has endorsed the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, DORA. This is an important step, but it's one thing to become a signatory, it's another to actually change the mindsets and behaviours of individual researchers and funders, especially those who hold positions of power when it comes to decisions about promotion or appointment, for example. So in some countries we know there are still approved lists of journals, where still there are financial rewards for publishing in journals which are seen to have a high impact factor, regardless of the intrinsic quality of the research itself. This is changing as more research funders and institutions have signed up to DORA, and it's been true within Wellcome, where we've worked very hard to ensure that our grant reviewers and committee members aren't using journal impact factors or titles as proxies for research impact, calling it out when it happens in committee meetings, rewriting our forms and our processes to prevent people using these simple proxies. We want to move away from a world in which venue of publication is the thing that matters, and where the nature of the research itself is what's critical to people's career progressions. But there is a real and valid fear from early career researchers that even if some funders or universities do succeed in breaking with tradition and adopting DORA, others won't, and that those who succeed will either be the ones who continue to play the old game or who have reached a stage in their careers, senior enough, for example, that they can afford not to play by the rules because they're so confident and secure in their roles. So we have to make this new approach not simply something that's applied on top of an existing model, but to go back to basics and to redefine what we mean by excellence. This means not simply looking beyond the venue of publication at the intrinsic quality of the research, but looking more broadly at what the outputs of research are. So recognising and valuing, for example, the work that goes into data collection or field research, not simply the analysis. Counting as significant outputs things like code, materials, datasets, tools. Recognising that we can apply the same principles of openness to these as we do to research articles. And beyond this even, recognising that open science must recognise openly all the work that goes into research, mentoring junior staff and colleagues, providing peer review or constructive feedback, fostering networks and supporting equality, diversity and inclusion in the research workplace. These aren't separate to or subordinate to the process of creating new knowledge. They're fundamental to it. And we have to see open science in the round, recognising all its different dimensions for it to be valued. Wellcome's proud to be taking these steps, working with others, but also publishing our own guidelines to institutions that we fund to describe how they can implement responsible and fair approaches for research assessment. At the moment, these are still guidelines. We want to work with institutions and researchers to test and develop them, much as we did in the early days of open access. We also want to work with researchers to get a clearer understanding of what does make a productive, open research culture, and what are the factors, what are the most important things in reinforcing both the quality of the culture and the openness which surrounds it. And as we become more confident in this, collectively, we can make these requirements stronger. For Wellcome, as we develop our new strategy, we're going to build it on a foundation which recognises that openness in science is not simply about what we do, but how we do it. And it will require a commitment to rethink excellence in ways which place openness at its heart. Thank you very much indeed. I'm looking forward to the conversation.